Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds. Welcome back, Matt.
Hello, Tom. Good to be here.
Matt, I asked you to take a look at a declination issued to the company, I can't find their name, University Space Research Association, and a self-disclosure it made to the Department of Justice, and equally importantly, a full declination given them around an employee. And I thought maybe we could explore that a little bit today. What did you see in reading the DOJ press release and perhaps the underlying declination policy?
I think that first we could call out the exemplary behavior of the company in question, which I'm going to shorten their name down to USRA, the acronym that the Justice Department used in their press release. But basically, USRA had an employee who was engaged in some fairly serious misconduct, and they did everything right. And so the Trump administration gave them the ultimate benefit of a declination. And in many ways, we could say this is sort of a textbook example of how enforcement should go and how regulators should be good partners with companies that are trying to do the right thing. And as cynical as we all might be about the Trump Justice Department in some occasions, and I will continue to be cynical in some times, this is not one of those times. It is refreshing to see that in at least some circumstances, the Justice Department will still build upon what prior administrations, including the Trump 1.0 team and Obama before that, there's a certain method to the madness about rewarding companies for being good partners to root out misconduct done by individuals. We can get into the specific facts of this case around USRA and its now former employee who was caught exporting software improperly to China. But I look at this and I'm like, yeah, this is exactly how it should all work. And this is something that compliance officers should be quite pleased to see.
A couple of things I'd like to start with, Matt. The first one was the contract that USRA signed with the federal government was with NASA, and it's listed in the press release back in 2016. There's no information given, and we don't have the underlying either indictment or criminal information that the individual, Mr. Soong, pled guilty to. So we don't know when the information flow started from USRA through Mr. Soong over to Beijing University. We don't know how long this went on, and that's certainly one of the things that intrigued me. The other thing, Matt, was in addition to your textbook example, which I think is spot on, the press release listed the Department of Justice National Security Division's guidelines around self-disclosure and what the benefits are, what you can obtain, a declination or of something else, or a reduction in your overall fine and penalty that you correctly noted was released by the Biden administration. And I had the opportunity to review that, and we haven't really looked at something along those lines, either on this podcast or generally for a while. And I thought there was some good information in there about what the DOJ expects. Once again, it's things we have seen before, but to have the opportunity to review them, I thought was useful. And then the last thing was, once again, not knowing the time frame involved. This seemed to be happened very quickly and very expeditiously. And I was reminded that during Chuck DeRoss's tenure at the Department of Justice, there was a opinion release given in 30 days. It was designed specifically to show that the process could go quite quickly. And that seemed to be what happened here. Any thoughts on any of the above?
Let me back up a bit maybe and give listeners a bit more context about exactly what was going on here, because I did dig up some news articles and whatnot. So this is this company, USRA, which is actually a nonprofit that is an affiliation of research universities that works with NASA, and they do aeronautic and aerospace scientific research and whatnot. To give you a flavor for, okay, clearly that would involve some stuff potentially that could be quite confidential, or at least that the US government does not want falling into the hands of adversaries such as the Chinese. That was the background. And so USTRA was a contractor with NASA. And then we have this person, employee, who is at the heart of it all. His name was Mr. Patrick Soong, I believe. And from roughly 2017, April 2017 through September 2020, oh, his name was Jonathan Song, not William, but Mr. Song was in charge of reviewing export control documentation and licenses for universities abroad that might want access to some of USRA's data and software. And he basically exploited his position to improperly give software code and data to a university in Beijing that it was not authorized. It was prohibited from receiving such information from the United States. And Mr. Sung knew this. He was the one who I guess was in charge of export compliance. We don't know his exact title, but according to the declination letter, he was the guy in charge there. He turned a blind eye to all of that, sold it to Beijing University. I think the full name of it is the Beihang University, which is in Beijing. But, it should not have received the data. He was paid to sell that data. He embezzled money from USRA along the way at some point and made a big mess of it. He was subsequently discovered as soon as USRA did realize what he was doing. They self-reported that apparently within a couple of days, they called up NASA to say that this was an issue. Please help us. And there was the self-disclosure prompt right away. The Justice Department then praised USRA for all the usual cooperation and whatnot. Mr. Sung was subsequently fired, indicted, found guilty, and sentenced to 20 months in prison, which he has already served. I do not know where he is these days. But Tom, I was reminded a lot of all of the times we have talked about declinations in the FCPA context. And we'd be saying all the same things, that a company would turn around and self-report quite quickly. They provide fulsome cooperation. That would be helping with documentation, doing internal investigations, keeping the Justice Department apprised. In the FCPA context, it was a lot of things like document translation and making employees available from overseas for interviews, things like that. We don't have so much of that here, but we did have USRA self-disclosing immediately, rooting out the full scope of Mr. Sung's misconduct, and then doing everything else to help the Justice Department get a conviction, which I believe he was sentenced in 2023. I think, but I also read a news article that said he is now out. So he's been released and whatnot. But this is like a bottle episode of a TV show. This is a bottle episode of how corporate compliance should work. That all neatly self-contained, start to finish, that what USRA did here. Might be worth noting that USRA does not seem to be a terribly large organization. I looked up some of its financials and its annual reports. It has roughly $60 million in change in annual budget. It's got hundreds of employees, but not more than 1,000. I'm not sure if it's hundreds 200 or hundreds 800, but it's a fairly small organization. I do wonder how much the facts of this case made it easier to investigate and resolve. An FCPA matter can be a big, honking, complicated mess. I don't think this was that, but they seemed to find it all very quickly and wrapped it all up in a bow. And within a couple of years, they had their conviction of an individual. And now we've got the declination and the whole thing's done.
Matt, there were a couple of other items listed in the press release that I thought were worthy of our talking about in the context of either remediation or what your program might need to include. The first one was that, according to the press release, NASA made the query to USRA about potential illegal users of their software or end users that were on some sort of denied parties list. The second thing was that the internal controls of the company had failed to pick this up. And then the third thing was a supervisor over Mr. Sung, I believe, was terminated, but certainly disciplined for failure to oversee the employee. So number one, how often is your customer going to ask, is someone nefarious getting our product? Number one. Number two is, how often should you check what your employees are doing? Because when the query came in from NASA, the general counsel apparently did some initial investigation, was lied to by Mr. Sung, and then the general counsel of the company ordered a further investigation. How much oversight, monitoring, Does all of this mean you should use, certainly in this context, but perhaps even others such as AML or ABC if we ever get back to that?
I think this is another good example of how that cliched phrase, a risk based approach, really does matter. When you think about what USRA did, what it deals in some highly confidential information. So clearly, if you look at what has been in the news for years and years, it is no secret that China is a geopolitical adversary of the United States. If you're dealing with potentially confident or with confidential information that could be potentially weaponized for a ballistics missile program or something like that, you do need to take it quite seriously. On the other hand, we should acknowledge that when an employee in charge of some compliance process, which Mr. Sung was, like when they're lying about it, that's a challenge. Yes, I am all for diligent employee oversight, but we do, to a certain extent, assume that employees are generally doing the right thing most of the time. And an employee who is committing fraud or violating the law, that is fairly unusual, fairly rare. So I've been thinking a bit about how important it is to know what your big risks are. And so for a business like USRA, export controls should be one of their more important risks. I would be hard pressed to know what else would be more important than that for a business like USRA. On the other hand, then, okay, so what are the controls we should be thinking about? Do you want to cross check people's work every single transaction, every single day, once a quarter? What would the cross checking of that look like? You're right that at least one of Mr. Sung's supervisors was found to be negligent in the oversight of Mr. Sung. I would be curious what the negligence was. Were they really letting him do everything scot-free with no oversight at all? Or was the oversight duty somehow flawed? Was that person not doing it, the supervisor, even though the oversight control was designed but not properly executed? We don't have enough information about that. But at the abstract level, think through what is our biggest risk given who we are, our product, our service, who our customers are, what the regulations governing all that are. Do we have the right controls to address that risk properly? And do we have the right controls? You can split that into two. Are the controls designed well? Great. But are we actually executing the control well at a supervisory level? Both of those things have to be true. You have to have a well-designed control and the right person is exercising it the right way. If you have a poor control, doesn't matter how good the employee is. If you have a great control, but you have a bad employee, doesn't matter, it still doesn't work. So it's a lot about thinking through what is the control design and then is it working as appropriate, which is stuff that internal audit teams look at all the time. And if you have an internal audit team or you have an external audit provider come in to take a look, that's something that they could do.
So I think that's really a great way to think about maybe the second part of what I wanted to try to communicate in this podcast. It gives every compliance officer the opportunity to focus on what are our key risks, how are we managing those risks, and equally importantly, how are we monitoring that management to make sure that one, the controls are working, two, that one, that they're effective, and then two, if there's oversight over them. Although this is, as you said, a straightforward textbook example of a declination, I've really found several things in here that I hope our compliance brethren will take away as maybe it's time to check one or two of these high risk areas. Any final thoughts from you?
I mean, look, it is good to see this Justice Department, and regular listeners will know I am not a fan of this Justice Department at the moment. It is good to see that they are doing the right thing here. They are making this declination letter public. I would like to see more such declination letters for this offense or any other offense. And it gives everybody a good sense to understand how can we get to the best resolution. And Tom, you're right that this is a neat textbook case of a good declination. Other compliance officers, you could look at this and be probably thinking, given what goes on at our business, we might not have a textbook case ourselves. You can benchmark what your risks and your compliance patterns and regulatory burdens are against this nice, neat thing and say, how would we get to a nice, neat settlement like this? What would have to be in place at our business to be able to get something as quick and neat and all tied up as what USRA did here? When we have different risks, we have a different size, we have different processes, then you can start to think through and come up with more of a, I don't know, a quasi remediation or a control improvement plan that will help you be able to get this kind of good outcome if the worst happens at your company someday, even though you don't know what that might look like yet. I guess that's what my closing thought would be.
Matt, thanks. And can't wait to see what the week will bring us, although I'm sure it will bring us something.
Thank you, Tom.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet. Every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.